Welcome to Inside Politics with Kevin Klein, Jeff Currier, and Royce Coop, where we break down the stories shaping our country.
Welcome to another edition of Inside Politics. This week I'm joined by my colleagues once again, Jeff Currier from the Winnipeg Sun and Royce Coop, a columnist with the Winnipeg Sun and also a professor of political science at the University of Manitoba. Well, Repatriation Day came and it went. A lot of experts, of course, saying that Canada was not really impacted that much. However, if you listen to politicians, it seems that we're still preparing for a war and that we're still supposed to be focusing on the whole tariff issue that Donald Trump is not put now against Canada, but against everybody in the world. Royce, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, we came out pretty good on that day. It could have been a heck of a lot worse. And as a result of that, I think that we're probably going to see tariffs and the threat of President Trump receding into the background a little bit in this election campaign. That's good for Pierre Poilievre, who's strong on domestic issues, the economy, inflation, home prices, and it's bad for Mark Carney. But of course, in politics, politicians don't just respond to things, they create the conditions that they think are going to help them win. And so what we've actually seen from the Liberals is kind of pretending that actually it was horrible news that we got from Trump, that we need to keep fighting back, that we need to do this and do that. And so I have some concern about the Liberal approach to this. I think it could potentially be damaging. We shouldn't look a gift horse in the mouth, and we should conduct ourselves accordingly.
Yeah, I think Royce makes a good point. Just from the purely political, strategic standpoint, Carney focusing on tariffs and Donald Trump is a sound strategy for him. Because without the tariff specter hanging over us with this Donald Trump's version of the sword of Damocles hanging over our heads, if that isn't there, then the Liberals have to defend their record of the last 9 years. And that becomes much more problematic for them. So from a strategic standpoint, Carney's on the right track. From the standpoint, is it good for Canada? Voters will have to decide on that for themselves.
Well, I agree with both of you. I wrote an article in the Winnipeg Sun and shared it online in the social media channels about the fact that Trump isn't our biggest problem. That our biggest problem, I think, is right here in our own backyard. We have a debt that is skyrocketing. Jeff, you have talked about it numerous times. Mm-hmm. The amount of money that the billions and billions we pay just to service the debt. We've talked about the trade barriers within our own country. We're not seeing much happen on that. We talked about the fact that we've got to get resources out of the ground. I'm concerned. Like I agree with Royce that this is simply being manufactured now by politicians to be this major trade war. And I'm concerned that we're going to see more and more Canadians cast a vote based on Donald Trump still than we will on the issues of Canada. I think we really have to start focusing on the problems domestically that we have. We're ignoring that. But how at this particular point in time, because mainstream media is all over the Trump tariff war. I mean, it makes for good money to beat up Trump and have this big enemy and have these bold headlines. But it's not helping Canada. How do you get the normal person, the person that's going to go out there and cast their vote, to think about the problems within Canada? And like Jeff said, how do we start thinking about the bad policies? Because really, that's what this election is about. 9 years of bad policies. How do we get back on track and start thinking about that? Because the polls are telling us differently. The polls are telling us Trump is the factor.
Yeah, and Pierre Poilievre has not sparkled in this campaign to this point either.
True.
Up until recently, all he had to do was to win the election was to not be Justin Trudeau. Well, now he's got to deliver the goods, and to this point, he really hasn't done it. We haven't really heard very much from the Conservative campaign about why it is the logical alternative to the government of the last 9 years. We're just not hearing that. They're not. Now, again, yeah, and you mentioned, Kevin, that the Canadian media is focused primarily on the tariff issue rather than domestic issues, and that's a tough page for any political leader to flip, to convince the Canadian media that you're not focusing on the right things. We're going to tell you what to focus on. It generally doesn't work when you're talking to the parliamentary press gallery.
Well, you're absolutely right. When I wrote this column saying we had bigger problems than Donald Trump, I mean, there was the trolls that came out from under their rocks, saying, "Oh, I'm a Trump lover. You want tariffs, you want this." And it's ridiculous, right? But that's the mainstream media again pushing that, Trump's this big evil monster that's hiding in the background. But I agree with you.
Well, he's not
Poilievre
hiding in
is
the background. He's right out front.
well, but Poilievre really hasn't sparkled in this, and I'm starting to think like, okay, he's loving the rock star status when he goes to all these, has these big rooms filled with people and their signs and all the anger and the frustration. But Royce, is it resonating?
Well, it is you both point out you're exactly right. There's a real focus on Trump in the mainstream media on tariffs. I think we've seen conversations in this country in the last couple of weeks about resource development, about economic development that we haven't really heard seriously in a long time. It's probably because the three of us are talking about it. We're moving public opinion in this country. Maybe not. But I mean, think about the last couple of months. There were people who seriously thought that the United States was going to annex Canada. There were going to be American troops marching into Canada, and our great Prime Minister Justin Trudeau said that. The Prime Minister of Canada told Canadians this is a serious threat. Of course, it was never a threat. It was always us getting trolled, and yet our leaders, media elites, cultural elites, actually kind of let that idea hang out there as a possibility. That's the kind of thing that we're dealing with right now, and a lot of Canadians are going to be influenced by that. With Poilievre, I have to disagree with you both. I think Poilievre has run a good campaign. I think what is a good campaign? It's disciplined. You stay on message. You actually kind of keep banging away on the issues that you're strong on. He's done that. We've actually seen some good policies from him.
Mhm.
Today, outstanding policy on intimate partner violence, cracking down, new ways of addressing that. Very welcome. I think it's outstanding. But yeah, it's tough for him to break through the noise, the Trump noise, the tariff noise. And if it recedes into the background, if Trump can just kind of keep quiet for a few more weeks, that might change. But if he comes back at us again, it's tough for him. It's tough for Pierre.
I want to point out just for a moment that you're absolutely right. The policy about the intimate partner violence that Pierre Poilievre put forward, I'm very grateful for. Now, some people will know if you check my website or you know my story, my mom was murdered by her partner. It's a very real problem that we have in Canada. I can tell you from being involved with law enforcement that the single biggest call most nights is domestic violence. They're dangerous calls. It's happening a lot. So I am actually quite pleased to see, and again, I'm not endorsing anybody. That was a really good move on Pierre Poilievre. I don't think it was a move. It's long overdue in this country. So I'm sorry. I wanted to put that out there that finally, we have some policy being put forward for that. We need policy put forward on other things. So let's talk about that. You said we're having all these conversations about getting minerals out of the ground or pipes or whatever, but Carney has said he's not going to revisit the what is it, Bill C-69, I believe it is, that caps our energy, that says no pipeline. So how is he helping?
Well, and also the Bloc is running on a no pipeline platform in Quebec.
Oh, perfect.
So
Excellent.
that's going to be problematic as well because the Bloc stands to do fairly well in Quebec this time around.
Cut off their funding. Cut off the transfer payments. If you don't take a pipeline, we're not giving you transfer payments. I mean, are we Team Canada or are we not Team Canada?
Well, the concern with Carney is that he actually has a very long public record on these sorts of issues. He's been writing and talking about climate issues, about carbon taxes, and saying things that we should leave oil and gas in the ground. It's better to do that. This has been the case for a very long time. It's just he hasn't been it's only been the leader for a few weeks, and the election is only 3 weeks from now. Journalists are focused on Trump, and they're not focused on actually looking at his record on these issues. I think that if he gets reelected, it will be basically status quo on pipelines and
Well,
resource
he's never been
development in this
elected. He's
country.
never been elected.
Yeah, right. Sorry. If he
He's,
wins the election, it'll just be the
he's
same.
never been elected. So, but have you've read his book, Values?
I
No.
flipped through. I didn't read
Oh,
it cover to cover,
you
but
guys have to
I've
read that.
read the highlights.
Yeah, it's scary. It literally is scary. And the fact that it should be mandatory reading for anybody who is going to cast a ballot in Canada. Like you should have to, it should be mandatory reading. There should be a way that you have to know that you've read that book and then you can go vote. Because I think Canadians are missing a really important part that you did talk about too, is that Carney has been on a trajectory for a long time. And that trajectory is very much laid out in his book. And he wrote a book about it. He published the book. He speaks to this, what he writes in the book. But that book is not showing up anywhere on the campaign
Yeah.
trail. And I'm quite shocked. People have to take the time to read this book before you vote. If after you've read the vote, that's the guy you want to vote for, that's your choice. But my gosh, you have to read that book.
Yeah, well, you know that's not going to happen, Kevin. You know that. You know Canadians are not going to all of a sudden rush out and buy, Mark Carney's version of Mein Kampf and go out and cast their ballot based on that. I
Then,
mean,
then
getting a Canadian to read a book of any description is pretty tough, much less one like that.
Then what are
Well,
we going to
but
do? I mean, we're just going to continue down this pathway. I mean, the U.S. I'm listening to economists talk to an economist today from the United States. They're saying if they didn't do this tariff issue, they were on a path of destruction with the debt they have, and their debt. Look at our debt. So what's going to happen? How could Canadians not read it, Jeff? And you're right. I know they're not going to, but my gosh.
it's asking a lot. You have to go out and read this huge, boring book that Mark Carney wrote. But wouldn't it be nice if the media actually did it for us? If we actually got some reviews that people would cover it if they talk about the ideas, because the contrast between Carney and Polyev becomes very apparent when you look at that book, when you look at the statements that Carney's made. Polyev has been a freedom guy the entire time. He's been a politician. Sometimes I feel like he actually goes a little bit overboard, but he's been very consistent about defending individual freedom. Carney is kind of the opposite. He is an elite. He's willing to use the state to be pretty coercive to accomplish things like addressing climate change. There's a real contrast there that Canadians could sink their teeth into if anyone was kind of giving them the opportunity to do so.
Well, let me talk about this thing because I think put Carney's book aside, let's talk about what he said when it comes to housing. We're going to build 500,000 homes. We can't build 200,000 homes right now. Like we're having a problem doing that. And then he put tariffs on products coming in from the US for construction materials. So how are we going to build 500,000? And if you look at his TV commercial, he shows wartime housing. So he's talking about modular homes. So what? We're going to have a bunch of mobile homes stacked on top of each other, all up and down like old neighborhoods of Canada. That's the kind of housing we're going to get. And they're hanging their hat on this, and Canadians are going, great, we're finally going to get some housing. I mean, this is also the guy that just announced he was going to increase the funding for the CBC. Don't read the book. Just read the headlines. I mean, if
Yeah.
the media is not
Yeah.
going to read the book, obviously, they're going to get more money. But wartime housing, the 500,000, let's talk about that. Let's inform people. Is that even possible in Canada?
It's improbable, but it's an election campaign. You got to make these grandiose promises if you want to get people to get out and vote. And I mean, whether or not people read Mark Carney's book, the average voter is not particularly familiar with the inside baseball portion of campaign issues and politics, tax issues particularly. I don't think most of the candidates are familiar with a lot of that kind of stuff, and a lot of that information. And so it's the big picture stuff. It's the big optics. We're going to build 500,000 new homes. We're going to fix this problem. You can go back to any number of people who made grandiose promises, back to Paul Martin claiming that he had fixed healthcare for a generation when he'd done nothing of the sort. That's just one example, not to pick on Paul Martin specifically, but this is what happens during election campaigns. I mean, if Pierre Poilievre was to come out and say something like that, it would be an attention grabber.
But it's so wrong, right?
Yeah, yeah. But as a great American president once said, you can fool some of the people all of the time.
Well, I can tell you as a former politician involved in party politics, I was a minister of environment. I have to tell Canadians because I feel I'm obligated. What Jeff said is absolutely right. People sit around these cabinet tables and they sit around the policy tables and they talk about what will get them elected. That's what they talk about, not what will fix the problems in the country or the province or the city. They talk about what will get them elected. And I sat there shaking my head, listening to politicians because an election was coming up saying, well, we have to fund, let's give out checks. Let's make sure we mail checks to people because when we mail checks to people, they vote for us. I'm in the back of the room banging my head against the wall, trying to get them to pay attention to me. And I'm being told, you're a rookie. You're a rookie. You don't get it. You don't get it. I'm grateful that I don't get it because what Jeff said is absolutely, we made promises. I sat there and I said, how are we paying for all this stuff that we're promising? We'll deal with that after we get elected. We'll deal with that after we get elected. Can you believe that? Canadians, please understand this is what's happening in these rooms. Politicians aren't even in the rooms. It's a group of people sitting there making up policy stuff that they think is going to resonate, and they're just pumping it out. Whether or not it happens is like gambling in Vegas. We don't know. It's a 50-50 shot. Am I wrong, Royce?
No, and saying like, okay, we're going to build 500,000 houses or whatever. That's a simple statement. People understand it. They can grab hold of it. But of course, no one really wants that. What we want is the private developers who can actually build homes that people want. They can respond to the market. They can respond to demand. We know that it's very hard, very expensive to build homes in Canada with
But let
you
me
know all the
stop. Let me
different.
stop you for a second. Doesn't that go back to that point? And you're the political science, so you can take us back in time. This is the government saying we'll take care of you. It's okay. Pat somebody on the back. We'll put you in government housing. Is that really what people want? Because that's what's happening in this country.
Yeah, I mean it's I'm not sure I would want to live in kind of a government mandated modular home. I don't like it when you leave it to the private sector to build homes, they build homes that people actually want to buy and people actually want to live in. And they generate wealth and jobs in the meantime. That's the way to do it. It's a bit much, when developers face all these obstacles to actually building homes, instead of addressing those obstacles, you say the government, oh, well, then we can't do this. The government is just going to build all the homes it sells. That's not a good solution. But it is something that sells well. Something that we also need to think about is the demand issue. On immigration issues, the number of people that have come to Canada in recent years has far outpaced the number of new home starts. We bring people to the country, there's nowhere for them to live. I mean, this is not rocket science, and I have some concerns about Carney on this. The Liberal government did a 180 on some of these immigration issues, but Carney's connections, his advisors, they're all people connected to things like the Century Initiative that want to see the population of Canada continually increase. And so it might be that these housing issues just get worse in the future.
Yeah, I think it's a tried and true electoral philosophy, though, Jensen. We all understand that. It's as somebody once said, you can't beat Santa Claus. And if somebody keeps promising to give you something, especially if they're taking the money from somebody else to give it to you, that's very appealing for a lot of people. And nobody wants to get pushed away from the trough. But the problem is that sooner or later they come for your money. And the Canadian middle class has been almost taxed out of existence in this country because there are only so many. You can't finance all of these grandiose government problems by continuing to tax the rich. The math doesn't work unless you pauper everybody making over $1 million a year. And even that, there aren't enough of them to pay for all these programs. So what do? Well, you start taxing middle class taxpayers. And so people need to say, okay, we're being offered this, but who is going to pay for it? Is it your unborn grandchildren who are going to be stuck with the bill? Possibly.
Or
because we're of a generation where we had to spend a couple of decades paying off Justin Trudeau's father's debt.
Yeah, and that's coming. Austerity is coming in this country, whether under Poilievre or Carney. Speaking of high taxes, one thing we're not seeing a lot about in the media now is the NDP campaign. It's completely collapsed. The party is at like 7% in the polls. You don't see Jagmeet Singh in the media, the campaign isn't going well. This is part of the reason why Carney is doing as well as he is in the polls right now. It's the
Mhm.
collapse of the NDP, and it's I think it's actually surprising the media is not covering that campaign, despite it's having real consequences for the election and the outcome that we're going to get.
What are you going to cover? I mean, I've got a column in this weekend's Winnipeg Sun about the NDP, and personally, I think they should all resign. I mean, they've all signed on saying, I've taken a position against Israel and Palestine to be a state and all that. Look, I'm tired. This is about Canada. It's the same I'll say about Poilievre or Carney. I don't want this to be a global election. We are not global. We are not the global leader in this stuff. We have problems here at home. The fact that they make that part of their campaign, they don't deserve to get any votes, in my opinion. That's my personal opinion.
Yeah.
But again, you're right. This is why, and we've talked about this on this program before. This is why the Liberals are jumping up in the polls, because they're turning to the NDPs are turning to the Liberals for their vote. They want to back a winner, and I think Jeff has said that before, right? Everybody wants to back a winner. They want to be able to say they voted for the right team, but I really think that's going to be an issue. But I think the media is trying to control. I really do. I think the media is trying to control this. They're making Trump the bad guy. They're doing what Carney wants done, and they're covering Carney. They're covering a little bit of the Poilievre and so on. But every time you see them covering it, they're again covering kind of the nonsense that's happening, and I don't think we're getting a clear picture of what this election is all about, and that's just my 2 cents worth thing.
Well, first of all, Trump is the bad guy.
Yeah,
Donald
okay,
Trump
but
is
I'm
the
tired. But are you tired of it? I'm tired of it. You're not going to
It
fix
doesn't
it.
matter if you're tired of it or not. He's not going away, and
But
the tariffs
he's not hurting our election. He's got nothing to do with our election.
well, apparently he does, because that's why Mark Carney's poll numbers are what they are.
I
And
don't disagree.
and for this issue aside, foreign policy is never a good strategy for Canadian elections. And why Jagmeet Singh and the NDP are even speaking about any foreign policy issues at a point when the Canadian economy is really the first and foremost issue we should all be discussing. It's bad strategy. So, and if the NDP is down 10 or 12 points in the poll, well, that explains a lot of Mark Carney's surge, right? Because those people are not going to default their votes to the Conservatives. A disgruntled NDPer is going to vote Liberal or maybe Green or something like that, but generally will probably park their votes with the Liberals on this. And so,
A frightened NDPer, someone that's afraid of Trump can be convinced to sign up for Carney, for the Liberals, if he's the one that's going to win. So one of the big, it seems pretty clear that one of the things that's going to come from this election is Jagmeet Singh will be gone. If I was a New Democrat, I would look over the last year and a half. The NDP kept Justin Trudeau's Liberals in power when Trudeau's numbers were absolutely in the cellar. They could have gone into an election, they could have taken the plunge, and they didn't. And the second that Carney became the leader, the NDP's numbers absolutely nosedived. Uh, I think Singh is gone. I don't see how he recovers from this. It's like 1993, where the NDP won 7 or 8 seats all over again. That's going to happen in this election if things don't turn around for the party.
I want to move on to the elephant in the room, and that's Western separation should the Liberals win. Now, we know that Preston Manning came out and talked about that, and Pierre Poilievre kind of stopped that pretty quick. But, I mean, Daniel Smith is under a lot of pressure right now from a lot of wealthy people, if you will, and a lot of very loud people in Alberta to call a referendum should the Liberals win, because their belief is that Mark Carney will not, and he said, of course, he's going to keep the energy cap and so on. He's really not for Western Canada. Royce, do you think that we're in a position now where that's a possibility? I mean, Quebec gets everything they want. All they have to do is threaten separation. Maybe that's something Alberta should do.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's two things here. There's a strategic part of this, which is it's not really good to be talking about this in an election campaign, which is why Poilievre shut it down. I think rightly so. Allow Canadians to focus on the federal election, on federal issues. We don't need premiers or foreign politicians sticking their nose in our federal elections. So I think that was a good response. But The truth is that if you're an Albertan, if you've had a decade of the federal government and other provincial governments making resource development projects impossible, stepping in the way of the aspirations of that province, and then you have an election and the same party gets reelected, and so it's going to be more of the same. Absolutely, explore alternatives, explore, your role in the country. Can we make reforms to the federation? Can we change things? We absolutely should. And ultimately, separation, as you say, Quebec has been threatening to do that for decades, to their great advantage. Why can't Alberta do the same?
I don't think they'd be taken seriously. They can threaten all they like, but I mean, what would be the event? What would a Western separatist movement look like? I mean, what would the configuration be? Would it be BC, Saskatchewan, Alberta, maybe Manitoba? Would it be just Alberta on its own? I mean, what would that look like? If you start talking about breaking up the Canadian Federation, I think when push comes to shove, not very many people are really going to buy into that. And even in Quebec, if you were to hold a referendum in Quebec right now, the separatist movement is not particularly strong. The Bloc is going to do pretty well in this election, but push comes to shove, people are going to stay in this confederation for better or worse. Now, I agree with Royce that Alberta has not had the benefits of confederation since Pierre Trudeau's national energy policy, and that goes back a long way. And Alberta has been propping us up, and there's a lot of resentment towards Alberta, and I'm not sure why that would be, since they've been the most consistent economic driver in this country for the last several decades. But if they were to separate, then what? How do they get their oil to market? What do they do?
Every Albertan, well, they just go down to Montana, Jeff. Every Albertan I've talked to so far would vote for it tomorrow. They want out. And it's easy to say that they won't, but if they go financially, Canada's in a lot of trouble. A lot of trouble. And if Alberta starts to go, Saskatchewan, I don't think would be far behind. So I think you'd have a Alberta Saskatchewan carve out. It's like Quebec leaving. I mean, everyone got all worried about it, but where are they going to go? Like, what are they going to become their own nation? They have to take part of their debt. Alberta can afford to take on part of the debt because they're paying it anyways. They're paying it for most of the country. All the transfer payments are because of BC, Alberta, and Saskatchewan. Nobody else,
Yeah,
right?
we'll see. I mean,
It's
it's just that we've heard this before from Alberta in the past, and we've been hearing rumblings out of Alberta for a long time about this. And I think I'd need to see, we'll see down the road. I think I need to see something a little more substantial than a few disgruntled Albertans or Daniel Smith kind of rattling her saber right now. I think we'll see in a year, 2 years, who knows? You're never quite sure how these things are going to play out, but I need to see something more substantial than what we've seen so far to buy into it.
We have a real problem with this country in that there is a whole group of people in central Canada and the Golden Horseshoe who, when Canada works well for them, they're perfectly happy. But when it doesn't work well for the colonies, for the prairies or for the outer provinces, then there's no real right to speak up about that, or maybe you should just keep the noise down. An awful lot of Canadians don't understand Alberta's contribution to the Canadian economy. Sometimes it's overstated, I think, in right-wing media, but oil and gas, you don't really want to live in this country prior to the discovery of oil in Leduc. Like, it's a major contributor. It contributes to the economy. It makes life in Canada better and more prosperous. And that's the kind of country I want for my daughter when she's an adult. I don't want to live in like agriculture dependent pre-Leduc Alberta. And so it does bother me. I don't mind seeing Albertans stand up for themselves and assert these sorts of things. I think it's actually healthy. When it came to actual separation, I would be horribly sad to see Alberta go. I wouldn't be in favor of that at all. But these are the kinds of conversations that we should have. When one area is consistently mistreated, then they have a right to raise concerns about that, and they should.
I think this country is incredibly divided. And I
Yeah.
think that this election is dividing this country even more. I think come election night, if it goes the way the polls are saying, it'll all be decided in Ontario and Quebec. And I think when I talk to my family or friends out in Alberta, I understand the frustration that they have no say They pay the majority of the check. Like they're picking up the tab for Canada in a lot of ways, but they don't get any say in that. And I think you're right. I think, Jeff, that's fine. You're looking for more proof than that, but I think they're at a tipping point. I think the country is so divided because of the last 9 years that I think this has been percolating for a while. There was hope when they thought the Conservatives might win, they might get their they might get their pipeline, they might get that cap taken off. But I think that hope is diminishing as the polls keep saying that Mark Carney is the guy. And I think that that division in our country right now is something that every person running for office better take seriously. Would you go, Jeff, if they were separated in Manitoba? I don't think Manitoba will go because Manitoba depends on government handouts.
Well, if there was a separation in the West, first of all, I don't think British Columbia would join Alberta and Saskatchewan. I don't think BC would be a part of that.
No.
And so if it's Alberta, Saskatchewan, who would want Manitoba? It
Fair.
sounds,
It's fair.
it sounds, I'm not trying to be glib about this, but we're a drain on the economies of the rest of the country. And so unless you have a Manitoba government that's prepared to exploit our natural resources the way Alberta and Saskatchewan have, we're going to continue to be a drain on those other provinces.
Yeah, I mean, there's a report showing that climate change could actually be quite good for the Canadian economy moving forward because it exposes mineral deposits in the north, including in northern Manitoba, that could now be exploited, whereas they couldn't in the past. And so Manitoba's best days could be ahead of it. It might be that the new Alberta Republic actually wants us. They have to bring us into the fold.
It'll take us 20 years.
Welcome to Rupert's Land. We'll bring the Hudson's Bay
Yeah.
Company back as the governing authority.
Yeah.
Well, it was a good conversation. I do want to highlight at the end of it, read Mark Carney's book, do your research before you vote. Don't listen to me. Who am I? I'm a former politician, so what do I know? But I can tell you from sitting in those rooms, they're not sitting there planning what's best for you. So when you hear all the policies and promises and stuff, be very careful, be very wary, and take the time to research that stuff, read the book, and remember what's happened in the last 9 years. And to Carney and the rest of them, pay attention to what's going on in Western Canada. You can't. I don't think Canada can make it without Alberta. To your point, Rice, we need Alberta, like it or not. We need Alberta. So we'll talk again in next week, gentlemen. I thank you for your time, and I thank you for your thoughts and your input. So until next week.